So, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Belongside Families would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining this webinar today. My name is Bree, and I'm joining you today from the lands of the Murrumbidgee people on the Yuin Nation. You're welcome to share in the chat the country that you're joining from. Okay, so why are we here? Many families tell us that while they've heard the term reasonable adjustments, they're not always sure what it actually means in practice, what schools are required to provide, or how to raise concerns when adjustments aren't happening the way they should. Today's session, Understanding Adjustments and Supports at School, is about helping families make sense of reasonable adjustments in a clear, practical way and supporting you to feel more confident having these conversations with school. We're really pleased to be joined again by Kim Waldron from Early Ed. Kim brings more than 30 years' experience supporting children with disability and their families across early intervention, childcare, preschool, primary, and high school settings. Her work is grounded in collaboration and supporting families to feel heard and confident as they navigate education systems. So, in today's session, Kim will explore what reasonable adjustments are, how they can support inclusion at school, and the obligations school must meet, and how families can request, review, and follow up on adjustments when needed. Again, like the other week, Kim is going to do a short presentation and then we'll move into Q&A at the end. As I said earlier, you're very welcome to pop questions in the Q&A box as they come up, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. So we're really glad that everyone's here today. And Kim, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is twice in 2 weeks, but I'm going to hand it straight over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bree. Welcome, everyone. I'd also like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. I'm on the land of the Darug and the Gundungurra people. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We just have a quick poll that we're going to run just as we start our session, just to see how everyone's feeling just as we begin. So the question is, how confident are you feeling in your understanding on the topic of reasonable adjustments? And just choose one. Very confident, confident, a little confident, not confident, or unsure.
I think most people have responded. I will share the results.
So we're sitting sort of in the middle, a little confident, not confident. So thank you for that. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions during our presentation tonight. So I'm just getting the hang of clicking on the different buttons here. Outcomes. By the end of this session, you will be able to identify what reasonable adjustments are and why they matter for inclusion and learning, the different types of adjustments that can support learning, wellbeing and participation, how adjustments are identified, reviewed and changed over time, how to work collaboratively with your child's school, and implementation of reasonable adjustments, considerations and possible barriers. We've got the links to the national standards and frameworks that cover the presentation that we're doing tonight. And most of it is around supporting relationships with families, collaborative partnerships, strategies to support full participation of learners with a disability, engaging with parents and carers in the education process, engaging with professional teaching networks, supporting student participation, engaging with parents and carers. And we also have the disability standards for education, which underpins a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So what are reasonable adjustments? We are all different and we learn in diverse ways. Teachers know how to teach their students. The aim of that's, obviously part of their training. And teachers can work out what kind of changes each student with a disability needs in collaboration with the student themselves and their family. And that's what we call adjustments. Schools must make adjustments that are reasonable. This means that they are balanced and fair. Now, reasonable, you'll find as we go through, and even just the term, I suppose, of the presentation itself, reasonable adjustments. What is reasonable? And you'll find as we go through this that can be a little bit subjective. An adjustment is reasonable if it does all three of the following. It supports students with a disability to learn along with other students. It supports students with disability to learn what they need to learn in ways that suit them, and it is fair to everybody else in the school. So this information comes from a website called the NCCD, which as soon as I said that out loud, I should have remembered the acronym. Sorry, we'll come to it.
Yeah, it's like nationally consistent collection of
It's
data.
very long. Yeah. What is it, Bree? Sorry, yeah.
I think it's something along those lines.
It's basically the data
Collection of
collection
data.
body. Yeah, it's they collect the data from all schools in relation to all of the adjustments that are made. And that data is also related to funding, the funding that schools get. So we'll go into that a little bit further. But it does have some really good information for parents. So some of what we will discuss tonight, when I was putting it together, it was hard not to kind of go off into all different I suppose, little tentacles of learning around it. Again, take away from it what is helpful, store away, what you think you might need later. Bree, as like similar to last time, she will share the resources. And you can go in as deep as you like into it. Sometimes I think it's really valuable to know where things come from. Like I know that helps me to understand the foundation of things, and then how to have discussions about it, how to advocate when where these ideas and where this legislation comes from. So reasonable adjustments are a requirement for all schools from kindergarten to year 12. And they're legislated and monitored under various state and national policies, including the Disability Standards for Education Act 2005 and the Disability Discrimination Act. Oh, here we go. This is where it was. Data and on reasonable adjustments is collected by the nationally consistent collection of data on school students with a disability. So again, that basically just means the body that collects nationally, all of Australia, collects the information on what sorts of adjustments or what level of adjustments a student with a disability might have within particular schools. Why are reasonable adjustments important? So they're important for inclusion, and they're important for supporting every student to access the school across all domains, physical, social, and the curriculum. Reasonable adjustments are not about equality, which is treating everyone the same, but rather about helping to create equity, which is treating everyone with fairness. Now, some of you may have seen a variation of this visual, which talks about equality, which is where everyone is getting the same support. And you can see that works for some. Others really need more, and others don't even need necessarily the resource that they're getting there. Although in this picture they still have the resource, I just realised, sorry. But in this picture here, it's about equity. So it's making sure that people who need a little bit more are getting a little bit more support, and treating everyone with fairness. Now, when I started digging into this meme a little bit more, you may also sort of go down the rabbit hole of that, because it came out quite a while ago and there's been lots of variations of it. And it's quite an interesting discussion around equality, equity, fairness, how is that achieved in our school systems, things like that. But I found that quite an interesting discussion. Inclusion. Simply attending school does not ensure inclusion. Inclusion happens when all children are seen as capable learners and valued contributors. So inclusion is not about changing a child so that they fit into the environment. It's about changing what we do so that all children can take part. Sometimes we think about, inclusion is a child coming into a mainstream classroom, but that isn't inclusion. If they're not necessarily having their voice be heard, they're not able to access any of the curriculum, they're not necessarily able to communicate with the people around them. I mean, I suppose we can all think of situations as adults where we may have gone into situations. We may have been physically there in that space, but we didn't feel necessarily that we belonged, and we didn't necessarily feel that we were included. So there's a lot more to inclusion than just physically being in that space. The different types of adjustments that can support learning, well-being, and participation. The types of adjustments will vary according to the needs of the individual student, and decisions are made at a school level to offer adjustments to students with a disability in curriculum work, assessment activities, excursion attendance, all of those sorts of things. And similar to what we talked about in the IEP, we talked about being collaborative and planning together. So that's very much built into the New South Wales, and I imagine the national curriculum and the planning of students for students with a disability. It's called collaborative curriculum planning, which really just means, similar to what we talked about with the IEP, that everyone who knows that child the best or who is part of that child's learning environment, as much as possible, comes together. And it isn't just a one-off meeting. It isn't, we don't make just an adjustment and then we don't talk about it ever again. The idea is meant to be that we talk about what's going to happen, we implement some of the strategies, we trial them, and then we come back together and we evaluate. Or they're evaluated as you go along and then they're talked about again in a group meeting, or even just an ongoing, email conversation, or both informal and a formal sort of planned way of discussing them. Sorry, I think I've just adjusted something. Did I, Bree? The little bar?
Yeah, you did. You should just be able to drag it up a little bit.
I don't think it's showing the whole thing. Is that okay?
It's just cutting off a little bit of the top of it.
Sorry, I'm not sure what I did to make that happen. Otherwise, I would reverse it. Oh, here we go. I think. Is that okay to leave it like that, Bree?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Well, we're sending out the slides anyway.
Sorry?
We're going to send out the slides.
Oh, you're sending out the slides. Beautiful. So teachers in schools, as I've mentioned earlier, work in collaboration with the child's family, and they decide to make reasonable adjustments. One of the things I think just to be aware of is that adjustments are done at different levels. So we'll just briefly go through that, which sounds a little bit like it's a lot of information sometimes, and some of that work happens behind the scenes. So it's not necessary that you can go to a school and you can say, listen, what can you tell me what level of adjustment my child has? Sorry, it's done something again, Bree. Or not? Can you see it okay? Okay.
It's the only thing, it's just cutting off a little bit of your heading.
Okay.
I can see the rest of the slide.
I will let that go. Okay, so number one is support provided within quality differentiated teaching practice. So it basically means students with a disability are supported through active monitoring and adjustments that are not greater than those used to meet the needs of diverse learners. So that's kind of what we call we have our foundational teaching practices, and then these are strategies that can be used as part of your foundational teaching practices. One of the examples they gave was whole school professional learning for the management of medical conditions, such as asthma, diabetes, anaphylaxis. So maybe once upon a time, that may have been, something that only like one or two people in the school might have needed, but now we've become more aware of it, and it's training that's given to the whole school staff, and it's active monitoring that's needed for those students. And it's part of the ongoing practice. So the school's general ongoing practice for all of the teachers and all the education staff so that they have those skills and knowledge. Another example that's given is around building modifications that already exist in the school and cater for a student's physical disability when no additional action is required. Okay, so it might be, you may already, because it's a new school, you may already have, say, for example, ramps built into the school. So there's no additional support that's needed, no additional adjustments necessary that are needed to support that child. Number two is supplementary adjustments. Students with a disability are provided with adjustments that are supplementary to the strategies and resources already available for all students within the school. So that's just slightly more support than is offered in general. So adjustments for particular activities at specific times throughout the week. So adjustments may include something like specialised technology, maybe when they go and do a computer workshop in the classroom, or they may be accessing the playground for a particular physical activity, and they may just need that support once or twice in the fortnight. Substantial adjustments is number 3. So students with disability have more substantial support needs, are provided with essential adjustments and considerable adult assistance. Adjustments to the usual education program occur at most times on most days. So you can see that as we're going up in the numbers, that you can see that the amount of support that is required, or the amount of adjustments that's required, increases. So it might be things like specialised equipment, closely monitored playground supervision, modifications to school environments might be needed, and also things like provision of specialist advice on a regular basis or support from specialist staff. And number 4 is extensive adjustments. So our extensive adjustments. Students with a disability and very high support needs are provided with extensive targeted measures and sustained levels of intensive support. These adjustments are highly individualised, comprehensive and ongoing, and the adjustments are needed at all times. Okay, so you can see that it might be a student who, I mean, a medical example, might be that they need, constant monitoring maybe with their breathing, or just to make sure that their position is correct or things like that. And without highly intensive intervention, these students may otherwise not access or participate effectively in schooling. Many students at this level have been identified at a very young age and have complex associated needs with regard to their personal care and hygiene, mobility. Maybe they use an AAC system, so an augmentative communication system, and they have supports needed when presented with new concepts and skills. So the reason I felt it was quite useful to mention that is because things like having, say, additional SLSO support, that may not be something that starts, say if your child's starting in kindergarten or starting in a new school, but it might be something that's required. And what will happen is the school will collect data on that, on the needs. But if it is something that's needed and you know it's needed right from the beginning, then this is part of what needs to be put in. The teacher will write up the adjustments and the goals and the support needs of your child, and they will, it's not tick a box, but they will allocate whether or not the amount of adjustments that are being done, what category that falls into. And then that information then goes, first of all, it gets audited by the school to make sure they're all consistent, because you can see that even just with some of that language, until you kind of get a consistent feel for it, it can be a little bit subjective. Like it's things like most of the time, or, it's that kind of language. It can be a little bit subjective. But once you go into it a little bit more detail, it is really interesting to see, how those adjustments are made and how those adjustments are categorized. And often there is a lot of discussion behind the scenes. Like I know as a teacher, there's lots of discussion of, well, actually that isn't supplementary, like it's maybe more substantial, so maybe more funding is needed. So these adjustments are linked to funding. So if you're, say, for example, in a Department of Education school, these adjustments will be put in on a student's IEP usually, or in a separate document maybe, and then the school will get allocated funding based on their level of need. And that's why I think as a parent, it's quite useful to know that. You may not ever be shared that information. Although I'm not 100% sure. I haven't been in a school where you have been able to share that information, but that is something, I suppose, if you're really advocating and you don't find that you're getting anywhere, it might be useful, for you to ask those questions. All right, planning adjustments. So again, when planning the adjustments, both the student with a disability, so the child's voice, we talked about that a little bit in the IEP last fortnight. And so really that is about, talking to your child about what sorts of things work for them. You know your child very well. Also encourage them to speak up. It may be something where they, create we talked about this last time too, where we did an All About Me page, and your child can contribute to that. Or there's also a really great template called a communication passport, which again speaks from the child's voice, the child's point of view. These are the things that I like. These are the things that I think are really fun. These are the things I really don't like. Please don't make me do those. Or, this is what I need. Or when I say this, or when I make this gesture, this is what that means. So again, there's lots of different ways that your child's voice can be included. The school should also be consulting with other people who know your child well. Again, as much as possible, try and get documentation if your child has a therapist, like different therapists involved. Get them to, contribute to what information they feel needs to be shared. And again, it's an ongoing process, similar to what I talked about with the IEP, that it's not a one-off meeting. It really needs to be an ongoing conversation. And this, again, is all information that comes from a document for parents, which talks about reasonable adjustments. So that's why I think that one is quite a nice one to have a look at. It's really just one page. I think it is interesting to look at the information that is shared. So all of this information that I have referenced tonight for tonight's presentation, all of that is accessible to anybody. So it's not information that I've been able to get because I'm a particular school staff member, that it's in part of their training. This is all information that is freely available to everybody, which I think is really good because it shows you the wealth of information that is out there. Here are 4 things which make consulting go well. Considering what the student needs. Listening respectfully to everyone else's point of view. And I know that can sometimes be difficult. Like usually if you're starting out, hopefully you're starting out in that respectful space where we are all listening to each other. But, we all live in the real world, and sometimes things don't necessarily go the way that we want them to. And it can then be really difficult to listen respectfully to everyone else's point of view. And that goes for schools as well as parents, as well as therapists, as well as, sometimes situations can get heightened because everyone believes strongly in, and, you as the advocate for your child, you believe very strongly in what you're saying. But yeah, as much as possible, everyone listening respectfully, and giving everyone a chance to say what they think, and then understanding what has been decided and what will happen next. So you really should walk away from a meeting knowing what the next steps are. If you don't know what the next steps are, then it hasn't been clearly conveyed to you. So that's really important. You kind of need to know, what the goals are, what the reasonable adjustments are going to be for your child within that classroom. Working collaboratively with your child's school. So I've written in here, preparing for your child's IEP plan. So again, it kind of links back to the one that we had a couple of weeks ago. Considering their goals and support needs. Again, plan ahead before these conversations. That's usually your best way forward, because then you come in knowing what it is you're going to say, knowing what is going to be discussed, and able to really advocate for your child. Share any relevant reports, positive behaviour support plans, share contact details for any therapists if you're happy for information to be shared. Some families, you don't necessarily want everything shared, but I know sometimes when I'm working with families, it is really useful, to share the notes from school, obviously with school, with the family, and also with the other therapists, because I think it's really useful for the other therapists in the team to know what goals are being worked on, because what that does then is also give you an opportunity, or give the therapist an opportunity in a different space to go, oh, the OT is working on this, let's try this. Or when I then get a chance to talk to the teacher, I could mention, oh, this is what's happening. And then it all just becomes, hopefully over time, common language, which is really useful. Use a team around the child approach to share ideas and keep the conversation flowing. And that's pretty much what I've just given an example of, a team around the child approach, which is where everyone's working together and information is shared. And it is really useful to, like I said, to share that information, because even if each person isn't reading every document in great detail, there are still things that you pick up as you go along. So you might just quickly think, oh, okay, they're using this. Oh, okay, that's, when this happens, that's how that's being responded to, or that's how the child is being supportive. It's got a little button there. I don't know what that says. Oh, the school and the teacher, how you can be kept informed. So different schools have different processes. We covered that a little bit in the IEP. So, schools are very different places to early childhood centres, where you might pick your child up, be able to talk to the educator and then leave. Schools, you can't necessarily do that because there are often more children. Everyone gets picked up, or, school gets dismissed at the same time every day. So talk to your school about how they think you might be able to be kept informed. It may be a quick check-in once a week in the afternoon, or it might be, just a quick email that gets sent. Again, I've worked with lots of different schools and lots of different teachers, and everyone has their own sort of way of working through these things. It's good if you ask up front, because then and then also, hopefully you're not feeling as if the information isn't being shared with you. The communication is really clear. Okay, so here are some examples of reasonable adjustments. And there are a lot. Like when I start looking, and also just from my own professional experience, there are a lot of different adjustments. So these are just some different examples. For example, just physical adjustments. So you might have adaptive furniture and equipment, maybe adjustable tables, seating supports, or specialised mobility aids to accommodate different physical needs. Depending on the age of the school, there are lots of schools now who are starting to, have like different size seats, or wobble chairs, or a chair that you can sit on where you have little foot pedals on the floor, or to help with sensory needs and that kind of energy, letting some of that energy out. So lots of schools, it depends on the age of the school, but lots of schools are building some of that in. Which means it would almost fall under that level 1 category. If the whole school has it already, then it isn't necessarily something that, like, it's good that your child may benefit from that, but it may not even be, or it would be like a level 1 adjustment. Clear signage and visual supports, using pictures, symbols, and labels to help children navigate the environment. I think, again, that's happening more and more in different schools. So, say, for example, a lot of schools, pretty much I think every DET school now has the positive behaviour support for learning plan. And I know when I first started seeing that come out, great program, like it works really well in a lot of schools, but a lot of the signage that was up around the schools was all in print. And, your little kindergarten people can't read that either. So I think now more and more you can see that some of that signage is being shown, with visuals to remind children of what the agreements are in those different spaces. Adjustments to classroom organisation. So having, considering the seating, not having too many things on your wall, having blinds on the windows to reduce glare on a whiteboard. You might also consider, if your child has difficulties hearing, might be, difficulties hearing maybe out of one ear, considering really which side of the classroom, they might need to sit on in order to access the learning. Learning adjustments and accessing the curriculum, having individualised learning goals. So using a different level of reading text, changing the expectations for assessment. So it may be that, your child might only answer one of the questions instead of 5 of the questions. Changing how the curriculum is presented, and provide learning scaffolds. So, making sure there are steps in place. And again, a lot of schools are starting to do that a bit more with like direct instruction type programs. But again, that needs to then work for each individual child as well. So it's just something to have a think about. Here are some further examples. So social, emotional, and behavioural. Communication and social support, so visual schedules and communication aids. So things like social stories, communication devices, using picture cards, peer support and buddy systems, Now, research shows that peer modelling is one of the best ways of supporting children to learn, because we're more likely to learn off someone who we see as someone similar to us. So if you can get a peer to kind of support different children genuinely and authentically, encouraging friendships and inclusion by pairing children with supportive peers. Clear and consistent instructions, so breaking down tasks into simple steps and using repetition and practice when needed. Oopsie daisy, I just went too far. Calm down areas. Nearly every classroom that I go into these days has a calm down space where children can go and self-regulate or take breaks when they're feeling overwhelmed. I think the useful thing about the calm down spaces is it gives a little bit of an opportunity for a child to be able to just go, I'm finding it overwhelming, I need to just go and sit in here. But also to use those spaces, I think, for individuals. Some children might not like, the really bright pictures on all of the walls. That might not be something that calms them down. So if you do go into one of those spaces and you think that's not going to work for my child, that's a conversation I think that you need to have. Positive behaviour support plans. So using individualised strategies to help children manage responses to their environment, and predictability and routine. So as much as possible, having a daily schedule. A lot of classrooms now put visuals up to say, this is what we're doing before, first break. This is what we're doing after second break. The difficulty with that is you might look at that and it might have, maths as a picture, but your child might not necessarily understand that maths means, we're going to sit and listen in our group, and then we're going to go over and work on the floor in another group, and then we're going to come back to the table and we're going to do an activity, and then we're going to come and sit and listen to the teacher again. I know sometimes we need to look at the visuals that are put up and making sure that each child, as much as possible, you can't obviously have 25 different types of visuals in the classroom, but I think breaking it down a little bit more, because I know sometimes students, it's like maths is going on forever. Why is it so long? Because they're not necessarily understanding that maths has all those different components, as an example. So, but I think, knowing what is going to be happening in a day goes such a long way to reduce anxiety and allowing a child to feel safe. So it's really important. And I think it's also really important as an example. It's important that those things are a concrete example that stays there, not necessarily on the whiteboard or the smart board where it comes and then it goes. Because, if that was my shopping list and it came and it went, I wouldn't necessarily remember it. So it's really valuable to have it there all of the time. Now, when I went and dug a little bit further, and you've got the reference there, so I won't go into it too much, but the examples that I gave there are obviously a lot more. So around communication, around writing, so making adjustments for writing. A child might be expected to write 5 sentences, but maybe your child is writing at the learning stage of writing 1 sentence. Reading, again, I mentioned that before, having adjusted different texts for different levels. A lot of schools do that and a lot of different classrooms will do that. But even things like field trips and excursions. So those are things that we need to really consider. Making, performing and constructing, that might be a little bit older. It might be in the high school for some of the, the vet subjects or things like that. But things around group work and also learning from home. Maybe it can be offered that, your child maybe cannot necessarily go for the entire day. That might be too much. And so then doing part of their learning at home and part of their learning at school. And I think as long as these things are discussed and they're planned ahead of time, it's not a case of, things are not going well, so therefore your child needs to go home early. As much as possible, if we can put those adjustments in place as a preventative, then I think that's really valuable. Okay, so we have the implementation of reasonable adjustments, considerations and barriers. That's a very long heading that I've given that. Adjustments need to come from a strengths-based approach, okay, and build on your child's skills. So very similar to what we talked about with the IEP needs to talk about, what is the goal that your child is trying to achieve. And just some points to consider. So schools and teachers are legally obliged to implement reasonable adjustments. And what is considered reasonable can vary from school to school. So I suppose the example that I gave earlier around, some of the older schools, just the actual physical buildings and the actual physical space, they haven't been installed. They haven't put in place all of the things to do with the Disability Discrimination Act or the disability standards for education. There may not be ramps, so those things may need to be built in. And if it's a school that has a very low budget or has a whole lot of other priorities in their budget, they may very well say, well, I'm sorry, this is not a reasonable adjustment. So again, it's partly similar to what we talked about with the IEP. If things are not going in the way that you want them to, obviously advocate and support your child to access their learning in that school. But if you're really finding it very difficult, then it may be worth considering, are there other options? Teachers and schools are committed to supporting students to learn. So that is, what's the saying? It's like a school's bread and butter. Is that the saying? I think is, that's what they're there for. So they are there committed to supporting students to learn. But different schools will have different, I suppose, inclusion cultures or different ideas around, what sort of adjustments they will consider, like I said, reasonable. Share information about your child when enrolling. I know sometimes when I've spoken to parents in that preschool, 1 or 2 years before starting school, sometimes understandably there's a hesitation around sharing information. And I can imagine it's very difficult to be sharing, confidential information all of the time. But I suppose the more information that you share with the school, the more the school is able to be prepared. Support class placements are often started 2 years before starting school. So a lot of what I've talked about today is not just around mainstream, it's also around, support classes. So if you're thinking about a support class placement for your child, reasonable adjustments still apply. You just may have a different starting level, I suppose, of the adjustments that are already in place, like a higher level of staffing, different classroom setup and those sorts of things, but definitely reasonable adjustments still need to be made. So if you are thinking about a support class placement, start that process 2 years before starting school. And if you're going to a Department of Education school, everything goes through your local school. So go to your local school and start having those conversations. I suppose something also to remember is not all strategies suggested by your therapist can be implemented within a school environment. So sometimes the strategies that therapists suggest may work very well in the one-to-one therapy session. They may work very well out in the community when your child's with their family. They may work very well in the home environment, but they may not necessarily work well in a classroom where, there might be potentially 25 to 30 other students, hopefully not 30, and especially in the younger grades, but and discuss with the school what is possible. And also on the flip side of that, it's also really good to remember that the strategies that you might be suggesting and advocating for your child actually often really help other children in the classroom. Like I know, years ago before we sort of had regular movement breaks, it was, that child, this child might need a little bit more activity so they can go out and play in the sandpit. But actually now we're realizing that pretty much all of us need regular movement breaks, and that's good for our mental health, it's good for our physical health, it's good with keeping us engaged. And that's a very basic example. But that is actually one of the things within schools when strategies are put in place and programs are put in place, that it may be to do with, one particular child, but actually the benefits of that come off that one child, if you understand what I mean. I'm drawing little stars up in the air. I don't know why I'm doing that. But that's kind of how it grows, and then it spreads until it becomes something that is just part of that teacher's skill set. And actually they're just doing things that they may not have been doing at that level, foundational skill level, but now they are. So that's part of their toolkits, part of their teaching practice. Other things to remember, I mentioned this last time as well, but it's just worth considering as well. Additional SLSO funding, I mentioned earlier too, is not usually provided in kindergarten classes until 10 weeks of data has been collected about a child's support needs. And mainstream classes have between 20 or 30 students, and all students are to be catered for. So I suppose that's the tricky part. If an adjustment has to be put in place and that I suppose makes something not as fair for other children in the room, then that's a discussion that needs to be had. Because, we don't have infinite resources. We don't have infinite staffing. We don't have infinite money. And so discussions need to be had about that. And again, this comes from the information from the NCCD about reasonable adjustments and information for parents. So in exceptional circumstances, schools can refuse to make adjustments. Note that if schools make adjustments for students with a disability, they do not have to make the same adjustments for students without a disability. So sometimes, I don't think this has happened for a really long time, so I'm not giving sort of a recent example, but, a school might say, well, we can't do that for everybody. Well, that's not the point. The point isn't that you're doing it for everybody. You're doing it, again, using that equality and that equity visual. You're doing it in order to make things fair. If a child doesn't need it, then there's no need for them to have access to that, whatever the thing is. When schools choose adjustments, they must explain their choice to the students and their families. Okay, so a big part, and actually the NCCD has updated some of their processes at the end of last year to make it even more of a push, I suppose, or an expectation that adjustments will be made in collaboration with families. It can't just be a ticker box where schools say, well, we've done that. If they haven't been able to actually have that conversation, they need to document somewhere why. Why was that conversation not had? And it might be for very valid reasons. It might be that, the family was away for a very long time, or things had to be started and still need to be reviewed, but that shows that it is considered a really important part of the process. And if schools refuse to make adjustments, they must explain why they refuse. And on that particular document, it talks about why. There are 3 reasons for why they may refuse to make an adjustment for a student with a disability. It would be too hard for the school, it would be dangerous for people in the school, or it would be against the law. So those are the 3 reasons. And that's obviously put in fairly simplified language because it's come from a summary document. You could dig into that a little bit further, because I don't really know what it would mean. It would be too hard for the school. I'm not sure. That could be, maybe financially too hard, or maybe if ramps need to be put in or a lift needs to be put in, those things may not be able to be retrofitted or things like that. It would be dangerous for people in the school, and it would be against the law. So, you can see from those 3 points, there shouldn't really be too many reasons why adjustments are refused. Sometimes students and their families disagree with the school's choice. So then you can take your complaint. So similar to what we talked about with the IEP, you can complain to the school's education authority or another authority. You can definitely contact family advocacy. So similar to what we talked about in the IEP process. And that the family advocacy, I think sometimes if you can get them involved earlier, not necessarily like as a preventative, to find out what information you feel you need. And also just looking at their website. It's a great website for letting you know what the expectations are from their point of view and what can be done. And there was actually a really interesting article, which I was going to put a link to. Actually, I might just do that on the ABC, just on the written ABC online. And it talked about a mum who had advocated for her child to be in a deaf and blind class within her local school. And it took quite a number of years, and obviously it took a lot of her energy and a lot of her time. And that's part of the discussion as well. Like, it shouldn't really be almost a full-time job for people to be advocating, for their child. But yeah, that's worked out very well. And, sometimes I know over the years, there's been some support classes that I have been a part of that really only started through parent advocacy. So, not saying that everyone has to do that, and you shouldn't have to do that, because, like I said, it does take a lot of energy. But I suppose it just lets you know that there are possibilities. Okay. We've come to the part where if you could write maybe one thing in the chat that you have learnt or found helpful from this webinar.
Someone's found the that with the Kindy SLSO support that they need to collect 10 weeks of data first.
Mhm.
Another person's written the 4 levels of adjustment. I didn't know about that either, so I was pretty interested in that. The link to all the lists of adjustments will be available. Don't worry, we'll be sending this all out.
I think there'll
Um,
be too many links, yeah.
yeah,
But again, no pressure. It's not a quiz.
yeah. Lots of links will be coming out.
Yeah.
Someone's added a clarification. Oh gosh, they're all coming in so fast now, it's moving too quick. Clarification that they can't be rejected unless it's really bad. The different levels of support and what they can look like. Sky's learned that the school must explain why they can't make the reasonable adjustment. Star found the equality and equity very powerful, and that support isn't just for learning, it's for well-being and participation. Cool. Oh, a few more coming through now. Yeah, different levels of support. And then Kira said, I feel like I'm always asking questions at meetings with school, so it's helping me navigate those conversations better, learning about the levels of adjustments and understanding schools can refuse adjustments. And someone's also added that they've learned that you can contact family advocacy to assist.
Yeah. They're a
All right.
great resource, actually. I've had a little bit to do with them through different families.
Yeah.
And again, as a preventative, I think sometimes we wait to ask for additional support um, after things have gotten not great. But definitely bring them as a resource ahead of time.
Yeah. All right. Well, we might keep moving through because there's quite a few questions that have come through.
Okay, great. Well, we've got the second poll, and then that's it, resources, and then we do the
All
survey and
right.
the
Let's do
questions.
our
So,
second poll then. Going to launch it.
so it's the same question as before. How confident are you feeling at the end of the presentation in your understanding on the topic of reasonable adjustments? Very confident, confident, a little confident, not confident, or unsure.
Oh, we're definitely seeing a few more on the confident, couple of very confident. It's definitely shifted. I think most people have responded. I will share those results with you now. So there's definitely been a shift.
Yeah, we've moved up a little. Yeah, as a group,
There's
that's
still
good.
a few people that are a bit unsure, but there are a lot of people that are waiting for the links and
Oh, yeah.
out in the email.
No,
So
it was. I do apologize. I did. Yeah, it was a lot of information,
yeah,
but when I tried to kind of cull some of it, I was like, no, that's really important. Oh, and I'd really want to know that as a yeah. And again, you don't need to dig too much further if today was enough. But yeah, if you want to go deeper, I think it's the
all right.
links.
We might jump into just a couple of the questions and then
Yeah.
come back to your presentation right at the end. But we've had a couple of questions around, is this the same for the Catholic school system and like the independent school system?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
They need to follow the same legislation.
Okay. We had a question very early on in the piece, just around when we were talking about the NCCD. Who's actually responsible to collect the data at the individual school?
Usually that would be, say, the assistant principal for learning, or there might be an AP attached to the support classes. It sort of depends on the size of the school, but there would be a specific, like, yeah, AP, assistant principal type executive level person who is collecting that information.
Yeah.
And also making sure that it's consistent across the school. So different teachers might be putting in what they think, but then there's making sure that there's consistency and agreement of what those different levels mean across the school before it gets shared.
Yeah. Um, for children who get overwhelmed by direct demands, is it okay to have passive engagement as a formal accommodation? So basically, can they just observe and listen without being forced to answer questions?
I mean, I would say yes. I mean, I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be able to be a reasonable adjustment because it's a way of allowing that child to engage in their learning. So yes, and
Yeah.
I don't imagine that we would have too many teachers nowadays that we might have had 40, 50 years ago that every child must answer every question or every child must yeah. So I imagine that would be fine and definitely something worthwhile bringing up.
Yeah. Are IEPs required for students that have supplementary supports, or is it more for substantial or extensive?
So IEPs can be required for any student that has a disability. It's not so much to do with the level of support. It's more to do with well, no, that's not true. Sorry, it is to do with the level of support. An IEP can be for any level, so it doesn't have to be necessarily only for, say, your level 3 or 4.
Yeah. We've just had a question as well, just around that 10 weeks of data collection for an SLSO. Do you know if that's the same for each state and territory? And does this also apply to preschool in states where this is offered through the public education system?
So that was two questions. I don't know if it's like if it's national. I'm not sure if it's national. Some schools will get funding in ahead of time. So, say for example, I know of schools, and like this year, for example, last year they were aware that there were several children coming into the kindergarten cohort that had additional support needs. So they actually created not a support class as such, but a smaller class with additional support in it. So sometimes schools do set aside funding and will be able to do that. But again, it doesn't happen in every school. Sorry, Bree, what was the question? What was the second question?
Sorry, I'm reading all the other questions at the moment. Um, where did that question go? Sorry, there's a lot of
No,
questions.
sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No,
I
that's
don't know
okay.
if it's across the state.
Where are we?
Yeah. Oh, actually, that was what I wanted to just say. I did put that in the slides, but then it didn't seem to sit. But now that that question's come up, I have recently just found out that if, say, for example, your child attends a Department of Education preschool and they have additional funding that allows them to attend that preschool, that additional funding actually goes with them to their local school, so to their mainstream class. So they would be a child who wouldn't necessarily need to wait the 10 weeks of kindergarten to get additional support because that funding may already have gone with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we escalate our concerns if we're not being heard by our child's school, principal, Department of Learning and Wellbeing, and the Director of Principals 2 years with ongoing issues? Maybe an advocacy organization?
Yeah, definitely. I would go outside the school system. Yeah, because you're not being heard and you can, I mean, you've just given a great example of how you've gone up,
Yeah.
you've taken it up the different levels and you're not
Um, we
necessarily having change. So,
we actually have an advocacy resource which lists some different advocacy organizations by state as well. So we'll
mhm.
make sure we include that in the resource email.
Yeah.
Um, So someone's just written, is that, so somebody's just clarifying, is that why my child entering kindy next year is going into a mainstream class first, so the school can assess what needs and adjustments are needed? So essentially it sounds like they'll do that collection of the data first before they'll look at whether
I suppose it depends on what process you've already gone through. Like if you've already gone through the process of, say, applying for a support class, I'm not sure if that's what's meant by that, but you may have gone. Some parents are quite clear that they want a support class for kindergarten, and so that an application hopefully will be put in by their childcare centre or by their preschool, and then it will go to what we say go to panel. Basically means that it gets sent to the Department of Education for their support classes, and people in the children in the local area are in order of priority and needs and spaces, like whether there's availability in the classes gets decided. I don't know if that's what they mean.
Possibly.
Yeah.
We've got another question just around, there's a few questions actually around IEP. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we actually share the link to the IEP webinar that we did two
Mhm.
weeks as well, because that might
Yep.
answer some of those questions.
Yeah,
Um,
because these topics are really quite like they're quite closely interlinked, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
I had another question just around can language therapy techniques be declined by the school? So use of keyword signing, visuals that are only illustrated versus real photos, use of lanyards, structuring sentences, questions differently.
I don't see why they could
Yeah.
be. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if they have been, then you would need to dig a little bit further as to what their reasons are.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, to me, that's generally building up your each teacher's capacity. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great resource, all of those.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that what you said earlier is that like the school actually has to tell you why that adjustment has been declined.
Mm.
Because it would be really good to sometimes understand, I guess, the reasoning and the thinking behind it so that you can sort of go, okay, I understand, or whether
Yeah,
I need to take this further.
yeah.
We've had a
And
question.
that can be asked, sorry, Bree, to
Yeah,
interject. And I know people know this already, but I know sometimes when I read that, I think, oh, how would I ask that? Like that would start a whole difficult conversation. But it may not necessarily. It may just be that, you need to have a little bit more dialogue about it. You need to share. This is why it's important. And then the school comes back and says, well, this is why we can't do it. Oh, well, can we reach a middle ground? Like it
yeah,
doesn't necessarily need to escalate. Sometimes it will, and it's unavoidable, maybe, but it can start off as just a conversation.
yeah. Um, we've got a few questions just around SLSOs. Like somebody's asking, do they need to be qualified or trained, and how do they know how to work with the child? Um,
That one I'm not 100% sure of. Like, I'm not
I
sure.
can just speak from my experience. We have
Yes, yep.
two SLSOs that work with my son, and neither of them were trained. We brought our therapy team in to build up their skills to support him, and they've been working with him since kindergarten.
Hmm.
I do know that there's other SLSOs in our school that do have some formal training, but again, I think it's about that it's almost individual to the person's needs.
Yeah,
We've got a question here around does funding follow a child from primary school to high school?
I'm not 100% sure about that. That is a great question, but I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure.
And again, I think that comes down to that IFS funding and the level. Again, in my personal experience, we are transitioning to high school and my son's funding does follow him. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's the case for everybody.
I mean, I imagine it would. I feel like it would make sense, especially if you're going to be within the same type of school system.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Another question. Sorry, someone's asked what is an SLSO? So that's a student
Oh, yeah.
learning support officer.
Yeah.
That title may change between states. Same with IEPs, sometimes known as ILPs in different states. We've had a question around how common is it to get a full-time SLSO in a classroom? I don't think it's very common.
No, it's not very common. And
No.
really, best practice, unless your child has, significant, like, obviously level 4 type adjustment support needs, we wouldn't necessarily, best practice wouldn't be that one SLSO stays with one child because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily beneficial for them. It stops them from, having independence. It stops them from having
Yeah.
the social, yeah, and yeah. And also, you want your child to be able to build connections with different people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're going to have to finish there. I will collate all the answers and, sorry, all the questions. And if any of the resources don't answer any of those questions, we will have a chat and try and get something out to you
Yeah.
all. Kim, did you just want to finish off your last couple of slides there? Because I think you've got like
Yeah, we've got the just the resources and the references.
yeah, which we'll send
So we could
out.
send out. And then just a survey link, which I think you're going to send out as
I will
well, Bree.
pop that in
Yeah.
the chat. Absolutely.
Which I know, it's like late at night, doesn't mean you have to need fill it out now, but it does give us some really valuable information moving forward and feedback on, what things went well, what things could do with a little bit of tweaking. So if you do have time, it would be really appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim, so much again for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. I feel like we could just keep doing these webinars. There's so
Yeah,
many questions that come up that we could
there
delve
are.
into.
Yeah.
Um,
They've been
yeah,
really informative to do actually as well,
yeah.
because you
And
start off
I'm like,
thinking
I'm
and
like
then
I
you
said,
go, oh, there's this and oh, this tangent
yeah.
and that. Yeah.
And my son's in year six, and I'm
Mm,
still learning stuff, and I love the links that you shared. I found them really, really helpful.
yeah, great.
Thank you to everyone that's
Good. Yeah.
joined. Advocating for your child at school can take a lot of time and emotional energy, and it really matters that you've showed up for this conversation. I do want to let you know, and I feel like there's a few people in the chat that this might be helpful for you, but we do have some advocacy at school workshops coming up. So these are actually very practical workshop. We've got one running on the 16th of March, and one during the day on the 26th of March. And these sessions focus on building confidence to advocate for your child, understanding your role, in school conversations and navigating challenging situations in a calm and constructive way. So we will definitely share the links for those workshops as well, because there was just a few little scenarios that people were sharing to me in the chat that I was like, well, we might need to just take that the next little step.
Yeah, good idea.
But if today's session has raised questions and may have helped clarify things or reminded you that you're not alone in navigating this, we really encourage you to stay connected. Alongside Families offers free peer support, workshops, and webinars designed to support parents and carers as they navigate school systems, advocacy, and family wellbeing. I do hope that you feel to leave tonight feeling a little bit more informed, a little bit more confident, and supported as you continue to advocate for your child. We will work as hard as we can to get those resources out to you in the next couple of days, and the recording as well for those that had to jump off early or who may have joined late. But thank you so much, Kim. Thank you. I hope we can work together again. I've really
Yeah, so do I. It's been fun.
webinars.
And I never say that about public speaking, so that's good. Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
wonderful. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thanks,
Bye. Bye.
everybody.